What's really going on behind the camera? Why did Jungkook suddenly cry and say, "I don't want this to happen" in Jin's presence? And is it true that Jimin's message is the beginning of everything until Taehyung chooses to walk away as they prepare to return to the military camp? This is not just an ordinary misunderstanding. This was the most emotional moment that Jin finally revealed to the public after a long silence. And the truth is more shocking than the army ever imagined. The truth is revealed. Jin tells the most emotional moment between Jungkook and Taehyung. Are you ready to find out what has been hidden from the public? Do you really believe that the relationship between Jungkook and Taehyung is always okay behind the scenes, especially when they return to the military camp? Or have you also ever felt that something was not fully revealed, a wound that had not healed, a message that was misunderstood, and a word that left a mark too deep? Jin finally spoke. Not in a press conference, not in an official broadcast, but in such a frank and tasteful conversation. A confession that he has kept tight for fear of adding to the wounds among BTS members who are already more than brothers. But this time, Jin chose to open the vote. And when he told me about the most emotional moment he witnessed himself between Jungkook and Taehyung, no one could hold back the tears. It all started in a brief meeting leading up to Jungkook and Taehyung's departure back to the military camp. The moment was supposed to be a moment of mutual encouragement, celebrating a short time together before returning to the harsh routine of a soldier. But quite the opposite. That moment became the turning point of a relationship that had been tenuous for one thing, a message from Jimin. "You know, I didn't want this to happen," Jungkook said softly to Jin. At that time, there were only 3 of them. The atmosphere was quiet. Only a gust of night wind could be heard outside the dorm window. Jin, who has always been known as the most mature and calm, can only look at Jungkook with a heavy gaze. He knew that there was something much deeper than a trivial matter. Taehyung sat quietly not far from them. But not because it's quiet. Silence, it is the kind of silence that saves the storm. His eyes were empty, but full of pressure. His hands clenched into fists, as if trying to hold back something that wanted to explode. Jin saw it all. He knew these 2 people held different burdens, and unfortunately, they never really talked about it. It all started with a message. A sentence from Jimin that was never meant to hurt, but was instead interpreted in the most painful way by Taehyung. "Don't be so trusting anymore. Some people change when they are away from us," he said. The message, which was supposed to be a loving warning, is instead captured by Taehyung as a hidden betrayal of Jungkook, and no one ever knew the full content of the conversation until the genie decided to tell part of this story. Not to open disgrace, but to show that even stars as bright as BTS suffer human wounds and misunderstandings. Jin couldn't contain his emotions when he saw Jungkook crying in front of him. Not with ordinary tears, but the tears of someone who bears a fault that is not entirely his. "He just wants everything to be like it used to be," Jin said. But when he tried to embrace Taehyung, all he received was silence. Cold. And it destroyed him. And perhaps even more painful is not only the misunderstanding itself, but the fact that none of them really knows how to fix it. Jimin, who was an important part of the relationship, chose to remain silent after realizing that his message had been interpreted differently. He feels guilty. But is guilt enough to heal an already gaping wound? Taehyung, on the other hand, harbored it all. He is not an explosive type, but when disappointed, he builds walls. And unfortunately, Jungkook was standing outside that wall knocking without knowing if the door could still be opened. Jin saw it all. He was in the middle of 2 hearts that were both hurt, but too afraid to admit it. V looked at me with eyes I had never seen before. Jin said softly, "The eye is missing something, or maybe it's letting go of something." Then, what really happened when they returned to the camp? Did the farewell take place with hugs as usual? No. What happened was silence. A farewell that is not accompanied by a hug, but rather a blank look and a back that moves away without a word. And it made Jin feel failed. I wanted to scream then. I want to force them to talk. But I know there are things they have to solve on their own. However, watching them like that, was the most emotional moment I've ever had with BTS, Jin said. Jin did not call this an ordinary quarrel.
No.
These are wounds that arise from love that is too deep, trust that is too high, and expectations that may not be realistic. Jungkook too wants things to stay the way they were, while Taehyung is too afraid to trust again. And in the midst of them, Jimin stood in silence, carrying the weight of words he never meant to hurt. Army around the world may never know that behind the laughter in front of the camera, there are tears behind the scenes. That behind the viral photo of togetherness, there are moments full of silence that shake hearts. But now, Jin let us know, not all relationships go smoothly every time. Even among those who have shared stages, rooms, and dreams for years, wounds can still be present. Jin concludes with one sentence that makes everything feel broken at one's hope. They haven't finished talking, but I believe one day they will be back together. And this time, without walls, without misunderstandings, only them and honesty that should never be delayed. Is that meeting going to happen? Will Jimin finally open up? And is Taehyung willing to listen to Jungkook's excuses that were never given because they had too little time? Only time can answer. But one thing is certain. That moment, the moment when Jin saw the two youngest members he cared about each other silent in the wound, will continue to be imprinted in his memory. And now in our memories too. Because this truth is too emotional to hide anymore. What really happened that night? Why does Jungkook look like he is carrying the world on his shoulders when he is known to be a figure of passion and strength? Why did Taehyung suddenly shy away from all contact when before he was the most expressive, the easiest to laugh, the easiest to hug? Jin remembers vividly how that night felt like the end of something. Not the end of the group, no, but the end of the sense of security that they had thought would always be between them. All members are undergoing their military service gradually, and the public only sees the side of discipline and devotion. But no one saw the emotional side. No one knows how hard it is to let go of each other, especially if the relationship has already begun to crack before the breakup came. Jungkook came first. Jin said that from the beginning. He already saw that there was something different in the magnate's eyes. He's not like usual, not very talkative, not joking as usual, but not because nervous or sad will part. That different. It's like he's shouldering a guilt he can't share with anyone, Jin said. When Taehyung entered the room, the atmosphere changed drastically. Not to be bright, but to be cold. Very cold. No greeting, no typical V chuckle. Only a small, barely noticeable nod. And even more devastating, Taehyung doesn't even look at Jungkook. Not out of hate, because if it is hate, at least there is still an emotion to be vented. But this, it's as if Jungkook doesn't exist. And that's when I knew, this is no ordinary quarrel. Jin said in a trembling voice. Jungkook tried to get closer. He tried to open the conversation, but all his efforts were like hitting a wall that was too high. Taehyung only gave a short answer, sometimes just a murmur. And finally, Jungkook said in a low, barely audible voice, "I didn't want this to happen." That seemingly simple phrase, it turns out to keep a ruined world inside. Jin finally ventured to ask after Taehyung left earlier than the brief meeting. He knew there was something that could not be left alone. And that's when Jungkook told me everything. In a quivering voice, with tears that he could no longer hold back, he revealed that it all started with a message. Not from him, from Jimin. "I didn't expect Taehyung to interpret it that way," Jungkook said quietly. "But I can't blame him either, because I was also sick when I first read the message." The message was sent by Jimin in an emotional state. He felt something had changed. Maybe because of the distance, maybe because of the busyness. But back then, Jimin just wanted to protect his heart, and the heart of his best friend. But the words he chose actually made the cracks that had been hidden to break. "Don't be so trusting anymore. Some people change when they are away from us." That sentence hit Taehyung like a knife. Why not? That sentence came at a time when Taehyung felt he was being abandoned. When he felt that the connection that used to be so strong with Jungkook began to fade. And he began to ask in his heart, do I still have a place in his life? Or everything is just nostalgia that has already passed? Jimin, after knowing what happened, immediately closed himself. He feels guilty. He wanted to apologize, but was also afraid that his words would only make the hurt deeper. And finally, he chose the wrong path: silence. Jin says that one of the most painful nights he ever experienced was the night when all three were in the same room, but in different worlds. They don't talk. They just sit. But I can feel everything. Sadness, angry, confused. And the guilt is so great, said Jin, barely wisp. After the tense meeting, the atmosphere at the military headquarters was never the same for Jungkook. Time goes by, but the pace seems to be lagging behind. He still gets up early, goes through training, maintains discipline, but something is missing. Not just the spirit, but the meaning of everything he does. Life goes on without a soul. Even his friends at training, despite not knowing the real story, began to realize there was different. Jungkook is not the type to complain. But whenever they sit back after training, Jungkook prefers silence. His gaze was often blank, as if his thoughts were far from there. And one thing that hurts is he keeps everything to himself. Does he want to contact Taehyung? Sure. But mobile phones are not something that is easily accessible in a military environment. And even if he could, the fear of being rejected, abandoned, or not reciprocated at all make him undo that intention many times. He wrote a message, many times, but always removed. Because for him, there were not enough words to explain this wound. And no words were gentle enough to ease the anger that might still be burning in Taehyung's heart. Meanwhile, Taehyung is seen at a different military location. And although not much news came out, the 1 or 2 moments captured on camera showed something that made the army start to wonder. Why is his gaze so blank? Why does he seem to hold back a smile, even in unpleasant situations? There's one photo taken from a distance, Taehyung sitting alone under a big tree, staring up at the twilight sky. The caption of an amateur photographer who was accidentally there wrote only one sentence: a gaze that does not seek anything, but also does not wait for anything. Is that a form of loss? Or a form of resignation from something he can't control? While both are wounded in different places, Jin, who has now completed his military duty, is carrying a heavier burden than ever. He knows everything. He witnessed the fall of 2 of his best friends without being able to save them. And when he finally had full access to the outside world again, he felt, don't know where to start. Should I talk to Jimin? Already. But the results made him even more doubtful. Jimin was too immersed in guilt. Even when Jin tried to explain that his intentions were not evil, Jimin still said, but the consequences are still painful, aren't they? I knew I had to talk, but I was afraid it would only make them hate each other even more. Jin began to write. Not on social media, but in his own notebook. He recorded everything he saw, everything he felt, everything he didn't have time to say. It does not know what it is for. Maybe for himself. Maybe for the army someday. Or for all 3 when they are ready. And one night, Jin decides to visit Jungkook's family home. Not looking for drama, but to see firsthand the wound is still healing. And when Jungkook's mother opened the door and hugged Jin without saying anything, Jin knew the answer. Jungkook emerged from the room with a surprised face. But not angry. Not disappointed either. Just a look like someone who has been holding back tears for too long. And after they sat down, Jin said only one thing. You can tell me, or not. I just want you to know I'm still here. It took 2 hours before Jungkook finally spoke. It doesn't tell you everything. But his last words before the genie came home made the night never forgotten. I lost you, Hyung. Not because he moved away, but because I let other people's messages separate us. On the other side of town, Taehyung sits on the balcony of his own house, staring into the distance. In his hand was a sketchbook that was already almost full. He drew a face, but did not finish it. Every sketch always stops at one point, the eyes. For some reason, he could never finish those eyes. That Jungkook's eye? Or his own eyes, which already do not know how to see the future? And that night, Taehyung opens an old folder on his phone. The folder he named. It's just old photos, mostly silly selfies of him and Jungkook. A few short videos, laughter, silly screams, and one 12-second clip. Taehyung and Jungkook sitting on the beach, silent, but lean on each other. Taehyung stared at the screen for a long time. Very long. Then hit the replay button. Again. And again. Can memories save something that was almost destroyed? Jin knew that he could not wait for them to reconcile on their own. He had to do something, but in a non-coercive way. So he decided